is, concrete universality is formed through the unity of the abstract universal with its constitutive exception. Unsurprisingly, Zizek considers such points of exception to be constitutive of the very site of political universality. Okay, now Zizek grounds this, as I've been saying, this analysis of the concrete universal in Hegelian thought. But it's also possible to see an equivalent to this notion in Marx's idea of particular species being. I haven't really given this much thought because I've been working with Zizek and Hegel most of the time, but since Sami invited me to come and share my thoughts on this issue with you, I have been researching this issue in Marx, and what I've been reading in Grundrisse, for example, lend itself to the same sort of analysis. So in the Grundrisse, Marx argues that every universality is colored by a particular content, and he distinguishes between two types of universality. But so one of the examples that he gives about this is the issue of labor. He says that, and I'm paraphrasing here, labor seems quite a simple category, and it seems to be a transhistorical universal. He says prehistoric hunters labor just as computer that's the commentator, just as computer programmers do. So it is with labor, which is why it is not until Smith in his analysis, reflecting on bourgeois society, that the category of labor achieves its fullest abstraction and generality. With the category of labor, we reach the abstract universality of wealth-creating activity, not tied to any one particular activity. Marx's argument is that this abstract category of general labor could only be developed within bourgeois society because it was only there that labor had in reality become general. In bourgeois society, no one form of labor predominates, such that individuals can with ease transfer from one labor to another, and where the specific kind of labor is a matter of chance for them, hence of indifference, unquote. So under capitalism, the abstraction of the category labor as such, labor pure and simple, becomes true in practice because it becomes abstract in reality. The abstract category of labor is thus based on what later Marxist critics call a real abstraction, an abstraction that is located in material practices and actions rather than in our minds, and which is then reflected in the categories of thought. And again, this is all part of a debate. I will talk about this later in the method that Marx develops in his critique of Hegel and the Grundrisse. In her article on this issue, Charlotte Bauman makes a very concise point and analyzes the different manifestations of this analysis of labor in Marx. And I'm going to use a long quote from her where she talks about the particular species being. She says, in German ideology, Marx notes that for modern workers, there's a difference between their role or profession and their existence as individuals, simply because of the fact that they cannot continue to do the same work for all of their lives. Competition and the lack of a means of income beside their own bodies force them to continually look for a new occupation, and it is mere chance as to where exactly they will end up working. The individual worker is therefore conscious that her personality does not coincide with her profession. This contrasts with the members of feudal societies where individuals are only the specification of something universal, namely their guild or estate. As Marx puts it in his Grundrisse, individuals are imprisoned within a certain definition as feudal lords and vassal, landlord, and serf. Marx welcomes, she says, the fact that capitalism introduces personal individuality because human beings stop identifying with a specific social role or group, quote, a limited human conglomerate, and are therefore able to identify with their humanity in general, their quality as a species being. The problem is that one lives this personality only in the private and non-political realm. Marx, therefore, she writes, demands the liberation of the individual from class individuality in all spheres of life. Human beings should be like private persons in their productive and political activities too. That is to say, human beings should be well aware that none of their activities defines who they are. No one should have one exclusive sphere of activity. Everyone should fish, farm, and criticize without being a fisher, a farmer, or a critic. Everybody should participate in the organization of society in an equal manner and relate consciously to society as a whole in all their manifold activities. Now, I use this to think about what I call the universality of the Palestinian struggle should be understood in this context of what, if we extend or extrapolate from Marx on the idea of labor, should be understood in the context of the truth of the post-colonial subject, which, as Zizek provocatively argues, lies in its abstraction, incorporation into the global capitalist system, not in its concrete cultural content. Post-colonial critics, Zizek contends, assume that the truth of the post-colonial subject living in a globalized world as its cultural life world, tradition, or way of life. Zizek refers to the Indian historian Dipesh Chakrabarty's example of the Indian software programmer who represents the truth of Indian life world through his concrete cultural content, such as rituals, etc. For Chakrabarty, this Indian programmer is a paradigmatic cipher of the unproblematic simultaneity or normalized coexistence of the universality of modernization and of particular life worlds. Zizek, however, correctly notes that, quote, postmodernity is not the overcoming of modernity, but its fulfillment. In the postmodern universe, pre-modern leftovers are no longer experienced as obstacles to be overcome by progress towards a fully secularized modernization, but as something to be unproblematically incorporated into the multicultural global universe. All traditions survive, but in a mediated, denaturalized form, that is, no longer as authentic ways of life, but as freely chosen lifestyles. In other words, within the totality of global capitalism, elements, Zizek says, of pre-existing life worlds and economies, including money, are gradually re-articulated as its own moments, exapted, as he says, with a different function. I'm going to skip this point about Marx's method in the Grundrisse because it sort of adds to this notion, explaining exactly how this links to, or the premises of Zizek's argument on the universality of the subject. And I want to take a moment, or thinking about this through some of the recent debates that erupted in Palestinian circles around, in the aftermath of the March of Return, and the whole debate that erupted about the humanity of the Palestinians, et cetera, et cetera. I have another example. I don't know if I will have time to talk about a biography by the Palestinian journalist Ramonda Tawil, Arafat's mother-in-law, who wrote a book in the late 70s called My Home, My Prison, where she calls for mimetic identification of the Palestinians as the Jews of the Arab world. And I wanted to talk about the problem, like simply put in my analysis, and which is the whole issue of the universality or the eminent universal core of identity, is something put in simple terms. Like some people call Edward Said the last Jewish intellectual, when many Jewish intellectuals like Arendt and others try to distance themselves from, distance themselves from Jewishness. So so this is what I really want to kind of see, thinking about those identities in terms of that universal dimension rather than the particular content. Anyways, in that debate about the humanity of the Palestinians, I will just go straight to the problem. You know, the debate about framing Palestinian humanity in international human rights regime or other sort of frameworks, and then the shift to nonviolent resistance. But what happened in that debate, they were met with denunciations of the dehumanization of Jews and Zionists by leftist circles on account of their purported anti-Semitism. The backlash came pretty quickly. In an op-ed for the Washington Post, Trua's executive director, Rabbi Jill Jacobs, apologizes for and defends the horrors of Israeli violence against Palestinians during the Great March of Return. Jacobs is clearly interested in the dehumanization Olympics, as I call it, in which the humanity of Jews and Zionists matters more than the Palestinians. She thus hypocritically implies that she is interested in a movement that requires caring about the dignity, well-being, concerns, and self-determination of all people. She does not acknowledge the humanity of the Palestinians in her piece, not even once. In the process, she co-opts a charge leveled against Palestinians in mainstream media to talk about the victimization of the Israelis who are allegedly blamed by leftists for their own deaths. But the real problem with Jacobs' essay is that she opportunistically refers to the horrors of anti-Semitism and the dehumanization of the Jews, while conveniently ignoring the role Zionist anti-Semitism plays today in recycling and spreading anti-Semitic tropes and rhetoric. The Israeli and Zionist establishment has made allies with right-wing populist nationalists and white supremacist forces that have been known to spew anti-Semitic propaganda. Trump's recent infestation comment about immigrants reeks of noxious anti-Semitic Nazi language. The fiasco of the opening of the US Embassy in Jerusalem speaks loud and clear about the complicity of the Israeli and Zionist establishment in the promotion of evangelical Christian anti-Semitic discourses that use the Jews as tools for the realization of their millenarian dispensational prophecies. Moreover, the Zionist anti-Semitism has also targeted Jewish organizations that are critical of Israeli policies and Zionist politics. Jewish Voice for Peace and other activists. Finally, as Zizek points out in one of his pieces, the Israeli government's calls on European Jewry to immigrate to Israel is the wet dream of every European anti-Semite, for it helps realize their dream of a Europe free of Jews. Nonetheless, we should the basis, and this is where I wanted to use Tawil, and I'll say it quickly. Tawil tries to reconstruct Palestinian subjectivity through the elevation of this notion of victimization. We are all victims, which we see in this discourse about human rights. By calling the Palestinians the Jews of the Arab world, she applies the sort of mimetic identification to the Jews, elevating Jewishness to a pre-ontological status of victimization, something that Judith Butler herself criticized Emmanuel Levinas on. You know, Levinas basically considered Jewishness and even Israeliness to be always already, as Derrida would say, already a victim. So I'm not really thinking that we are reframing Palestinian identity with this discourse. We are trying to substantiate the content of Palestinian identity as a victim in those ontological or pre-ontological terms does not work for me. And I feel that instead of giving people that discourse of humanity, I would rather radicalize the struggle the way that Zizek says. Thank you very much.
شكرا جميل. ننتقل هلا مع سامي.
Yes, thanks, Ala. I will very quickly repeat our thanks that we already mentioned yesterday of the institutions that made this great event possible. And again, thanks to Birzeit University for hosting us today. Thanks to the Cultural Studies and Philosophy Department, the Department of Democracy and Human Rights, to the Khalil Sakakini Culture Center, the Goethe Institute, Ramallah, the Rosa Luxemburg office in Ramallah, and also my current affiliated university, the Leuphana University, and its program on cultures of critique, and their funding institution, the DFG German Research Foundation. I would also like personally to thank those who have made this event possible, namely Yazan Khalili and Lara Khaldi, Mona Kriegler and Lena Kund, Ute Boyk, Sari Harb, Charlotte Sass, Rami Salami, Ala Zeh, and Muda Kassis. Thanks a lot for coming. also have prepared a paper, and to the translators, I gotta apologize. It's not really the paper I sent a couple of days ago. It's always last minute work, so it's a variation of what I sent earlier. First of all, I changed the title. Is it okay with that distance? Yeah, okay. I called it originally The Time of Capital and or The Revolution of Time. It was a very optimistic title because there was no time to write the part on the revolution of time. So we are stuck with the time of capital. In 1978, the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben wrote, "The original task of a genuine revolution is never merely to change the world, but also and above all to change time." In 1858, in the Grundrisse, one of the preparatory texts preceding Capital, Volume 1, Marx stated that it is, quote, "the economy of time to which all economy ultimately reduces itself." Following these insights, my paper starts from the assumption that any radical change in the mode of production must also affect the constitution of time. Capitalism is not merely a historical epoch, but also a specific regime of time as social relation. Capital, as Marx claimed, quote, "is not a thing, but rather a definite social relation of production belonging to a definite historical formation of society, which is presented by a thing and lends this thing a specific social character." The thing, of course, is the commodity. If in capitalism, the commodity is the bearer, or to be more technical, the objective shell of specific social relations, we can trace the social constitution of time, that is, time as social relation, back to the commodity form. Marx's interest in the constitutive link of time and political economy reaches back to his earlier studies, even prior to the project of the critique of political economy. In the essay The Poverty of Philosophy from 1847, he writes, it's also a quote, "Time is everything, man is nothing. He is, at the most, time's carcass. Quality no longer matters, quantity alone decides everything, hour for hour, day for day." End of quote. In capitalism, time appears as an alienating, negative principle, systematically subordinating the human being under its laws. As a result of industrial capitalism, humans as laborers are abstracted from their generic faculties and reduced to mere bearers of labor power, disciplined by and subordinated to the time-stamp clock. Of course, the classic image that we have in mind is modern times Charlie Chaplin. As the proverb has it, time is money. For it is labor only that produces economic value. As Marx put it in Capital, how then is the magnitude of this value to be measured? Plainly by the quantity of the value-creating substance, the labor contained in the article. The quantity of labor, however, is measured by its duration, and labor time in its turn finds its standard in weeks, days, and hours. End of quote. By labor, Marx does not mean any labor, but labor as value-creating substance, which he also defines as abstract human labor, or labor as such, Jamil mentioned already, in opposition to concrete labor. Value is formed and performed by abstract labor, which is itself defined by another relation, a relation of time. Abstract labor, however, cannot be measured by chronometric time, as Marx reminds us. Quote, "The time spent in production counts only insofar as it is socially necessary for the production of a use value." End of quote. The measure of socially necessary labor time is not external, but internal to the very relation it expresses. Socially necessary labor time is not an empirical amount of time, but time as an abstract social relation. In order to unravel this paradox, let us remind ourselves of Marx's starting point. Marx said, and we know this of course from Capital Volume 1, the commodity has a dual nature, use value and exchange value. Whereas the use value seems unproblematic, bound to a concrete, useful thing, the exchange value expresses an abstract social category, that is, value. As bearer of value, a thing exceeds its thingly or thingish character. It possesses a certain quality that turns it into the materialization of a social substance, value. The temporality of value is different from the one of use value. A thing as use value can be measured by its movement, spatial extensions, and temporal durability. As bearer of value, however, a thing entertains a relation, a social relation, a value relation to other things, insofar as they are the results of the application of labor power. And we know labor power is the only commodity that can produce value. This abstraction from use value is redoubled on the level of labor relations. Concrete labor is measured by chronometric time, basically my watch, whereas abstract labor time expresses an abstract yet really existing social relation, which appears on the market as a money relation between exchanged commodities. In other words, commodity abstraction is a dialectical process combining two antithetical temporalities: the time of commodity circulation on the surface of the market and the time of the production process. This temporal dialectics is not static, but moving. It pertains to a phantasmagorical, intoxicated or speculative time, the time of capital. This time cannot be represented spatially, like vulgar concepts of time. From the perspective of the production process, the concept of socially necessary labor time is already an abstraction from the multitude and specificity of concrete labor times. When different labor times are equated as socially necessary labor time, the particular qualities of each labor and the labor process are abstracted. So Marx used the famous example of carpeting or being a shoemaker and so on. In this way, when exchanged as equal values, the products of the production process can circulate in real time without representing the concrete labor times that were equated in the production process in the first place. Thereby, the time of commodity circulation is never in tune with the time of its production process. And indeed, as Marx scholar Riccardo Bellofiore argues, quote, socially necessary labor time constituting value is not just a technical average, because the sociality of private laborers, and so the same magnitude to be measured, is eventually fixed in market exchange. Thus, socially necessary labor time is known only ex post, après coup. This intervention ex post curves the linear time of the production process, concrete labor, and introduces a dimension of logical time, that is, the anticipation of the time of the market and the retroactive determination of the value that was generated in the production process. So we already see the dialectics of time get a bit more complicated here. We have two times, or two temporal trajectories here. The temporal split between concrete labor time and its abstract average is further complicated on the categorical level of the commodity form. Although abstract labor, value, cannot be rendered in terms of quanta of concrete labor measured by the linear time of the production process, weeks, days, and hours, the commodity form is a necessary condition for the production of the chronometric standard that allows, in the first place, for quantifiable time units of concrete labor. Or to put it differently, the category of abstract labor already implies a social mode of time as measure, which is not merely a concept applied to a given mode of production, but the very production of this standard, qua abstract labor time unit. In capitalism, time does not only function as measure, but also as a real abstract relation of the social. If it were just a measure, it could be just, then we could look at our watch and we could immediately know in which duration you have produced which value. In his reading of Marx's Capital, Alfred Sonretel coined the term real abstraction, we already heard it, characterizing an abstraction from use value actually performed by economic agents in the act of commodity exchange. Following Sonretel, the coin, the money sign, is the historical as well as logical origin not only of commodity exchange, but also of the philosophical Kantian transcendental subject, its pure concepts or categories and pure forms of intuition, namely time and space, structuring the logical as well as aesthetic forms of cognitive knowledge and experience. In this way, the coin is not just money in the instrumental, economic, vulgar sense, but as a mediator of exchange, but also the logical origin of everything the ancient Greeks considered as koinos, common or general. Money designates the ordinary token, commonly accepted sign of economic value, and at the same time the shared common structure by which the subject's cognitive faculties are structured. The capacity of spatio-temporal intuiting and the faculty of apprehending the manifold and determining its general features by means of intellectual abstraction. Following the Aristotelian terminology, Kant mentioned 4 categories: quantity, quality, relation, and modality. These categories underpin any logical judgment and provide the a priori framework for conceptual knowledge, which operates through conceptual abstraction. This a priori capacity to abstract, however, is not only intellectual, but shares its seemingly ahistorical logic with the historical practice of abstraction, operative in economic exchange relations, materialized and contained in the coin. In other words, real abstraction does not only refer to the prevalence of exchange value over use value, but produces the universalizing form of commodified exchange relations beyond, or rather before, the intentional preferences and choices of economic agents. Commodity exchange, the act of equating social labor by exchanging its products as commodities, performs a real abstraction, not an abstraction in mind, a real abstraction by doing, which remains unconscious, and yet this real abstraction is objective and real, and therefore not subjective or thought-induced. With Alfred Sonretel, we can claim that the Kantian a priori, or pure, forms of intuition and understanding have a history, a repressed history that remains unconscious and unrepresentable from the Kantian standpoint of transcendental, that means ahistorical forms. As Sonretel put it, time and space, rendered abstract under the impact of commodity exchange are marked by homogeneity, continuity, and emptiness of all natural and material content, visible or invisible. It's like air. So time and space as a priori forms of intuition are abstract in a specific sense. They function as empty ahistorical containers for empirical events. It is in this sense that they assume the status of timelessness and universality, and thereby repress their socio-historical origin rooted in the commodity form and real abstraction. Such formal abstractness of time and space is to be differentiated from empirical abstractness of concrete appearances in time and space, which are also dehistoricized under the impact of exchange abstraction. So I'm not talking about empirical phenomena like you feel alienated from the labor process or alienated by impersonal social relations and capital. Social relations are abstract as well, but this is an empirical form of experiencing abstraction in capitalism. Abstraction here is understood not as a symmetrical antonym to concreteness, but refers to an unconscious, intersubjective practice of dehistoricization. Every time we pay with money, this dehistoricization is at work. Only by repressing the history of a negative social relation, that is, class struggle and the exploitation of labor, the semblance of the universality and timelessness of commodity exchange can be maintained. So what then is abstract about abstraction? It is the enforced repression of negativity, the effacement of the uneven and discontinuous history of antagonistic struggles. This repression as social practice has real effects that pertain to both the formal disappearance of material traces in value, giving rise to the transcendental semblance of universal and timeless categories, remember Immanuel Kant, and the empirical liquidation, extraction, and transformation of concrete labor as abstract labor, allowing for time and space to be treated and applied as abstract resources of capital accumulation. I'm almost done. Don't worry. In the real abstraction performed in commodity exchange, the formal abstract dimension, that is abstraction of time and space, and the empirical formal dimension, abstraction in time and space, intersect. And this intersection is only provided by the money form. In other words, abstract labor and the real abstract nature of time and space are codependent. Once money has assumed the specific capitalist money form. Capital time is insofar self-referential and cyclical as it requires money as its transcendental condition. I will stop in 5 lines. Even though money seems to be a sign, an abstraction from actual commodities, it functions as a real money commodity. And here I refer to Marx's famous image that he used in the first edition of Capital Volume 1 in 1867. It's not the one that is normally translated, which is the 4th edition. And here Marx writes, when he talks about the value formal dimension of money, it is as if among and besides lions, tigers, hares, rabbits, and all other real animals, which are as classified as groups, constitute the various genera, species, subspecies, families, and so on of the animal kingdom, there existed also the animal, the individual incarnation of the entire animal kingdom. End of quote. Within the sphere of value, thus, we are confronted with a fundamental paradox, an intertwinement of nominalism and realism. That is to say, money is both a transcendental concept for value, a general equivalent a priori, and the commodity actually produced within the production sphere. And of course, this paradox cannot be solved on the basis of linear chronometric time. If you want, the animal as such, really existing, is the dimension of capital time, the curved, condensed time of a time that you cannot measure in abstract, in linear, empty time like chronometric watch. Yet without this animal, as such, living among the others, lion, whatever, zebras, and so on, the others could not be measured in time. These are the 2 dimensions. Of course, now the second part has to start to unravel this, but we do this another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Now, Anna, Wasim, yeah.
أسعد الله أوقاتكم. الورقة، وشكرا طبعا لجميع المؤسسات المشاركة. أوكي. طيب. شكرا لجميع المؤسسات المشاركة في هذا النشاط، وبشكر زميلي علاء ورامي لدعوتي لهذا النشاط. الورقة بعنوان مفهوم ماركس للحرية. بطبيعة الحال وقبل البدء بالورقة نتحدث هنا عن الحرية كمتعين في الممارسة التاريخية، وليست الحرية كما تناولها ماركس في مفهومه عن الحتمية. يعني ليس الحرية بمفهومها الفلسفي المجرد، وإنما بمفهومها الاجتماعي التاريخي الممارس. بداية يمكن الادعاء أن ماركس برغم أنه لم يتناول مفهوم الحرية بمعناها السياسي والاجتماعي صراحة وبشكل مباشر، إلا أنه لم يغفل المفهوم، بل أن له أهمية خاصة في جميع أعماله، باعتبار أن فلسفة ماركس المتعالقة تجعل من الممكن تحري المفهوم واصطياده من خلال شبكة مفاهيمية تنتشر في جميع أعماله. حقل التنقيب عن مفهوم الحرية في هذه الورقة هما عملان رئيسيان له: المخطوطات الاقتصادية والفلسفية لعام 1844 ومساهمة في نقد الاقتصاد السياسي في العام 1858. بطبيعة الحال ستستعرض الورقة 3 مقاطع أساسية. الأولى هو نقديته إلى كل الجذور المؤسسة لمفهوم الحرية في التقاليد الليبرالية، ثم نقف عند كل عمل لنجد التقاطعات وكيف يستطيع في نهاية الأمر مفصلة مفهومه الخاص عن الحرية خارج إطار التقليد الليبرالي للحرية. في البداية طبعا وضع ماركس جميع مفكري العقد الاجتماعي تحت مبضع التشريح النقدي، حيث خلص إلى نتائج هامة، أهمها أن مفهوم الفرد في التقاليد الليبرالية لا يعدو كونه تجريدا نظريا منفصلا عن واقع النشاط الإنساني، فهو يقدم الإنسان أو الفرد بمعزل عن مجتمعه ونشاطه داخل هذا المجتمع. ثاني المسائل أن تركيز هذه النظريات على تفسير وتبرير دخول الفرد في العلاقات الاجتماعية وشروط تشكيل المجتمع تعاقديا، تبدو هذه التفسيرات جميعها متداعية بالنسبة لماركس، فالإنسان الفرد كان دائما اجتماعيا، وحتى فرديته إن صح التعبير لا يمكن إلا أن تكون على أساس اجتماعي. ثالث المسائل في نقده لنظريات العقد الاجتماعي المؤسسة لمفهوم الحرية الليبرالية بأنه يعتبر أن كل الفكرة سواء الفرد أو ما يتعلق بحريته ليست إلا محاولة للانفصال عن الإقطاع أو عن نظام الإقطاع الذي بدأ بالتهاوي، ومن ثم تبرير وتسويق الرأسمالية الناشئة حينذاك، وأن النجاح الذي حققه طرح مفكري العقد الاجتماعي للحرية هو نقل الحرية إلى صيغة تعاقدية بدل تلك الطبيعية المتخيلة، دون أن يعني ذلك الوصول إلى حرية متساوية عند الجميع. ثم ينتقل ماركس في نقديته إلى حقل آخر هو آدم سميث، ونستطيع الوقوف على النقاط التالية. بداية أن مع آدم سميث سنستطيع تلمس الفحوى الاقتصاد سياسية للحرية، وهي ذات الفحوى التي نلمسها عند ماركس لاحقا، وإن افترقا في المنبع والمصب. حسب سميث فإن للحرية مفهومان: الحرية الطبيعية والحرية الكاملة. الحرية الطبيعية هي حرية موجبة تقوم على قدرة الفرد على تقرير مصيره، فيما أن الحرية الكاملة سالبة تتعلق بغياب القيود على الحرية. على أن استخدام سميث لهذا التمييز ليس واضحا، إذ أنه كثيرا ما يستخدم المفهومين على التبادل، لكن ما يمكن التقاطه هنا أن سميث يعتبر أن الحرية الموجبة تركز على شروط الحرية التي يمكن من خلالها أن تخرج الحرية السالبة لحيز الممارسة، كما أن سميث يرى أن الحرية المتحققة داخل السوق لا تشترط القصدية، كما أنها تقوم على اعتبارات أخلاقية أكثر من كونها عقلية. وهذا ما تتم ترجمته من خلال أن تحقيق الأفراد لمصالحهم الشخصية يتضمن بالضرورة خير للمجتمع. وهذا يقتضي مرة أخرى للتأكيد أن طرح ماركس للحرية يتناقض تماما مع طرح آدم سميث، حيث أن الحرية بالنسبة لماركس هي سعي أو نضال وصيرورة عقلانية وقصدية، وهو ما نفاه آدم سميث في مقاربته للحرية. ثاني المسائل، أو يعني الآن نبدأ مع العمل الأول، هو مفهوم الحرية في المخطوطات الاقتصادية والفلسفية، والتي تتم جميع المفهمة من خلال التعالق بين الحرية وجوهر الأشياء ومفهوم الاغتراب لديه. يرتبط مفهوم ماركس حول الحرية الإنسانية بتحديده للطبيعة البشرية، ولذا أكد في أعماله مراراً على تكريس مفهوم عن الإنسان خارج التقليد الذي قدمه المفكرون الليبراليون، والذي كان على درجة عالية من التجريد. وبالتالي يصر ماركس على إنسان مدغم بالطبيعة التاريخية وبطبيعة التاريخ على حد تعبيره. بالنسبة لماركس فإن ما يميز الإنسان عن الحيوان هو نشاطه الواعي، فجميع الحيوانات تقوم بتلبية احتياجات بقائها. الاختلاف الجوهري هنا في الطريقة التي يلبي بها البشر احتياجاتهم، ففي الوقت الذي تتصل فيه الحيوانات مباشرة باحتياجاتها، فإن لدى البشر ما يمكن تسميته علاقات توسط مع احتياجاتهم، أي تلك العلاقات التي لا يمكن أن تتم إلا من خلال علاقة البشر بعضهم ببعض وتنويع احتياجاتهم والمفاضلة بينها، الأمر الذي يظهر بشكل واضح في قدرتهم على العمل. إذن يعتبر ماركس أن للبشر علاقة فريدة بالطبيعة، فإنتاجهم للأشياء من الطبيعة لا يقتصر على إشباع متطلباتهم المادية أو حاجتهم للبقاء، بل تمتد أيضا للنشاط الجمالي الذي من خلاله يعيد الإنسان تكرار ذاته، أو لعله قصد إعادة خلقها سواء في عالم الواقع أو في الوعي، كي يتأمل هو نفسه في عالم خلقه. من هنا فإن مفهوم ماركس عن الحرية يتضمن قدرة الإنسان على تحقيق ذاته بإدراك نفسه في الوجود عبر نوعي النشاط آنف الذكر. هذا النوع من الوجود ليس معطى جاهزا بالنسبة لماركس، بل هو صيرورة تشكل وخلق. وعلى ذلك فإن تحقيق الإنسان لحريته ضمن تلك المقاربة ليس بالإمكان أن يتم كفرد، فمن أكثر المستويات بساطة لأشدها تعقيدا، فإن الإنسان أي من إنتاج الحياة ووسائل العيش والإنجاب هو يحتاج إلى الآخرين، وليس مجرد أفراد معزولين مغتربين في علاقاتهم بعضهم ببعض. في المخطوطات يتناول ماركس المعطيات الاجتماعية من خلال مفهومه عن جوهر الأشياء والطبيعة البشرية، فهو يؤكد بشكل قاطع على العلاقة بين جوهر الأشياء والوجود المادي لها. فإن الإنسان ككائن واعي وفق ذلك يفترض أن تكون حياته موضوعا له، وهذا تمييز آخر بين ما ينبغي لكل الموجودات وما ينبغي للإنسان، أن الإنسان يعي حياته، وبالتالي فهو يكرس نشاطه الحياتي المنبثق من جوهر وجوده وطبيعيته ليكون مجرد وسيلة لوجوده المادي ولتحقيقه. وهنا يؤكد ماركس على أن الاغتراب عن الطبيعة تفضي لاغتراب عن الآخرين، فطبيعة الإنسان واحدة سواء مع ذاته أو مع الآخرين. وهذا ما ينبغي إدراكه تماما لاسترداد العالم الحقيقي المختطف بفضل عوامل الاغتراب. يبقى من الأهمية بمكان هنا أنه رد الاغتراب في مخطوطاته إلى علاقات الإنتاج أو العمل، لا إلى الملكية الخاصة. أما في الكتاب الآخر وهو مساهمة في نقد الاقتصاد السياسي، وبعيدا عن اللغة المكثفة للاقتصاد السياسي التي يستخدمها ماركس، يمكن أن نجد التالي: أن ماركس في كل تحليلاته يحاول أن ينأى بنفسه عن تلك الصورة الاستاتيكية للتاريخ التي قدمها المفكرون الليبراليون والرأسماليون. وبالتالي فإن إدراك الإنسان لدوره وفاعليته من خلال نشاطه وبخاصة العمل تعد اللبنات الأولى لمفهوم ماركس للحرية، حيث أنه ينتهي بالحديث كيف استطاعت الديمقراطية الليبرالية أن تبرر أو أن تسوغ فهمها عن الحرية ويصبح خارج إطار النقد أو الثورة أو إلى آخره. هو يعتبر أن منظومة الحريات الديمقراطية الليبرالية قدمت إيهامية عن الحرية، حيث أنها خلطت الحرية بحرية السوق وحرية التبادل في السوق. وعلى ذلك وكجزء من تلك الإيهامية أصبح الفرد يستطيع أن يتلمس حريته بالمقارنة مع نظام الرق الذي كان سائدا وليس بما ينبغي أن تكون عليه الحرية. ختاما، نستطيع القول أن مفهمة ماركس للحرية تختلف عن كل التقليد الليبرالي، فالحرية بالنسبة له لا تنفصل مجددا عن العلاقات والنشاطات البشرية، ويتجلى في الممارسة التاريخية، وليس كالحرية التي تقدمها المقاربات الليبرالية التي تقوم على تصور لكائن إنساني مجرد معزول أو محض وجود فردي. فبالنسبة لماركس فإن الوعي كما الحرية ليستا إلا نتيجة النشاط الاجتماعي له. شكرا.
شكرا وسيم. شكرا جزيلا. تفضلي أنا.
Thank you so much. I also want to extend my thanks to all the organizers without repeating the long list. My colleague here listed up on before I started. First of all, I have to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me at very short notice to this panel. I have to say I'm here now since 1 month, around 1 month. So I only started to settle in here, and I'm not going to present a finished paper as my colleagues did. So as I was invited to this panel at very short notice, and I had to think about what I should present on, I had only, say, 2 weeks to prepare. So what I will do now in the next 10 to 15 minutes is more or less a free speech. Nothing written. I know you are shocked. I will try to speak very, very slowly to help the interpreters, the translators. But what convinced me to talk about this topic, a critical look on the current debate about the need for a new social contract in Arab countries, is first of all, I have written some years ago a chapter in a book published by a colleague of mine and me about the rebellions on the so-called authoritarian bargain. The authoritarian bargain as a specific shape or form of the social contract. Second, some time ago, I stumbled over, by reading some text, I stumbled over a comment by another author that Marx criticized this social contract. Specifically, he called it a historical fiction, and specifically he asked or scrutinized the elementary assumptions of this social contract, which is a completely liberal approach, of course. And maybe I can connect a bit on your speech too. We can discuss later on the concept of freedom as part of this concept of social contract. Third, what we made decide for this topic is that you might have recognized it too in recent years that with the rebellions, the debate for the need of a so-called new social contract sprawled. So it might be an interesting issue to look on this, to take a critical look on this debate, supported by the criticism raised by Marx 200 years ago and his followers and those who interpreted and developed his thinking afterwards. So what I will do now is first of all talk about this criticism in a very short version. I think we can discuss this later on, hopefully. And then I will give you a short brief about the literature, this debate about the new social contract, who is behind this debate, who are the organizations pushing this debate since the rebellions, if they, how they define in their works the social contract concept, if they provide for a discussion or if they try to refer to the original concepts and what they recommend to what should be part of or form part of these new social contracts. So now I'm not used to speak into a microphone. I'm so sorry. Normally my voice is quite very tough, so but we'll try. What is the so-called social contract theory? It's more or less, it was established first by Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and those authors. And Lesnov, political philosopher, he defined the social contract theory as most typically one which grounds the legitimacy of political authority and the obligations of rulers and subjects and the limits thereof on a premised contract or contracts relating to these matters. So in an ideal case, the specific contents of a political social contract will find their manifestation in one form or another in codified law. In most cases, however, and specifically when it is used in political discourses, we have this in Germany too, social contracts are far from entailing anything written. So they are more or less a holistic concept anywhere in the air. They sometimes are even not providing a social imagination of an agreement by all members of the society. Karl Marx himself, he did not write much about this topic. There are some hints at Rousseau, for example, in the Grundrisse, and there's a letter from him written to Engels about Hobbes. But most of the work I'm relying on now, I'm referring to now, is written by those who have followed up or have further developed his thinking about the social contract. So Marx raises more or less 2 or some say 3 points. He does not go in accord with the let's say, founding fathers of the social contract concept or theory. The first thing is on the individualism. he opposes the individualist premises being the ground or being the basis for these social contracts using. He considers the function of this individualism to universalize and dehistoricize a conception of human nature, which was in fact a product of the market society, which it served to justify. He sees these writers such as Ricardo, Smith, Rousseau, a representative of particular interests and values, which needed to be universalized in the process of the ideological struggle. Second, he believed that the formal freedom postulated in liberal theory provided the framework of a society in which the majority of people enjoyed little substantive freedom. The formal freedom of liberal society, for example, masked the denial of human freedom for the mass of workers. So he opposed more or less the conception that social life endorsing private property as constitutive for freedom, for being free. And the third thing by what Lawrence Wilde also commented on his critique, on Marx's critique on the concept of social contract, was that he was more or less committed to empirically grounded research. And what he said, what others such as Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau have done was primarily fiction. He worked with premises, with assumptions that had nothing, in his eyes, had nothing to do with the real life. So specifically transcending from an individual, like also feminist critical theorists wrote about it in more recent years. This Hobbes' economic man, the radically individual, rational economic man, who only goes for collective action, who only starts to build a society, to join other people for the reason, because it is better not to fight each other, for example, like this, or this, okay. Do we, yeah. I think we will do this later on, because I just have shown the 5 minutes, chap, so I have to go on. So, when I come back now to what has been written in recent years after, specifically after the rebellions about the so-called the need for a new social contract. I think you would not be surprised when I say the debate has been going on before also, before the rebellions. So there have been some articles, some books been written on that topic. Even some Arab writers raised this topic. Razan Salameh, for example, he published already in 1987 a book at the Center of Arab Unity Studies with this topic towards a new social contract, in which he stated, or he made the point that Arab regimes are losing legitimacy, and so we need to build up a new social contract. What he recommended at that time, what needs to be done, is more or less the same, what you can find now in the new literature about the new social contract. next thing is, you would not be surprised when I tell you now that most of those currently writing or discussing this need for a new social contract are those institutions like World Bank, IMF, Balfour Center, and all those firmly grounded in rational choice, in institutional economics, and so on. And you will also not be surprised when I say, when you go through this literature, they rarely go back to the original concepts. They do not debate the original concepts, or let alone the critique raised by many authors against the theory of the social contract. When they define the concept, what is meant by a social contract, they always first refer to the authoritarian bargain as the specific Arab shape or form of a social contract, like a perverse form of social contract, but they do not define it further. So when they recommend it, and then I will close, I know I have to close, what they recommend, and this is, it's not surprising at all. Of course, they recommend comprehensive reforms. They recommend that the relationship between the state and the citizens needs to be put on a completely new level. They admit, okay, there must be political reform too, together at the same time, simultaneously with economic reform. But you can imagine what they call for when they talk about economic reform. The most new thing is what the World Bank calls for in the new development report 2019. And the same it has written also in a book about a new social contract in the Arab world in 2015, is the state, the governments should concentrate on investment, on infrastructure investment. They should take care for equality and justice via social protection, but now it comes. The state should better concentrate on cash transfers, substituting for the old world, the old-fashioned Bismarckian social protection systems, because this does not work not in Arab countries and not in the developing world at all. So we should substitute this with cash transfers, with a single income for all and such things. And how to pay for it? Yes, we should try to call the digital firms to pay their taxes. So I think we have now many points to discuss. If the social contract concept or approach or theory, how you call it, if this really a good concept to capture such a discussion, or does it hide, how Marx would call it, does it hide the relations of power behind it? Thank you so much.
شكرا للجميع، لجميع المتحدثين. معنا في نصف ساعة تقريبا لفتح حوار أو تساؤلات للمتحدثين أو ملاحظات أو تعليقات. تفضلوا. بس الرجاء انه يعني اذا في سؤال محدد للمتحدثين لتحديد لمين السؤال. شكرا. تفضل عيسى.
مرحبا. طبعا هو السؤال بشكل عام مزبوط، وانا معني اكثر اعرف حول المساهمات في تطوير فكر ماركس، وتحديدا بالعالم العربي اللي شوي في اغفال لهذا الجانب، يعني في اغفال للناس اللي حاولت تطور في فكر ماركس في العالم العربي. فأنا بحب أعرف إذا في ملاحظات عند المتحدثين حول هذا التطوير، فاذا في بالذات كوننا بنحكي عن جامعات ما شاء الله يعني على الاقل 3 أو 4 جامعات موجوده قدامنا، فهل الجامعات اليوم عم بتقوم بدور في تركيم او مراكمه الجهد لتطوير فكر ماركس او غيره؟ بس يعني بما انه احنا بنحكي اليوم عن ماركس فهذا اللي بهمني بالاساس. شكرا.
شكرا عيسى. سلمان.
شكرا للمتحدثين. سؤال للأستاذ سامي في مسألة القيمة والبضاعة والتبادل، تم إغفال المنفعة المجتمعية أو الحاجة للبضاعة. يعني لو جبنا لما انكسر دانلوب وأفلس كان يطور عجلات الطيارات بس ما كانش في طيارات، لو بقي لحد الآن لكان من داعمي جامعة بيرزيت بينما مات مديونا يعني. أو إذا رحنا إلى بلد يعاني من المجاعة وأخذنا الهدية مثلا شحنة كوكاكولا، أو إذا هدينا مدرسة للأطفال العميان تلفزيون، ما قيمة ذلك بالأخير بدون حاجة؟
أستاذ أنا متأسف مش عارف اسمك. صهيب.
Hi. You said about the social contrast and that Marx he faced 3 races, and about what he believed in, and like the way to the revolution, the way to the freedom, it's by ending slavery. Like, is it like he started by this way? Like, if we end the slavery and there's no slaves owner, no more slaves owner in anywhere, we can start our revolution. And by the other hand, like when we finish this, we can get rid of the dark future. But also we can't do it without just putting our goals, our aims. Like we need our revolution without guns, with no violence, with our thoughts, like by being more genius, more intelligent. Because he had like many points, many thoughts, many opinions to do, and how to face this. And like when he went to London, all the people, when they just met him, most of the workers, they were holding guns. And when he just went there, they said, okay, we will finish this with guns. He said, no, we don't need any violence. تمام. إنه الطريق إلى الحرية يبدأ بإنهاء العبودية، والثورة تاعتنا راح تكون بدون عنف. احنا مش بحاجة سلاح. لا هو سؤال من ضمن السؤال. لا وإشي صار يعني برضه إنه أنا قرأت في مقال يعني إنه كيف هو وصل لندن.
صحيح.
الناس
إذا في سؤال محدد يعني هيك أظني وصلت
اللي هي الفكرة كانت إنه كيف إحنا بننهي العبودية بنقدر نبلش الثورة. ما بنقدر نفتح المجال هذا أو ما بنقدر نعمل أي إشي والعبودية موجودة.
شكرا جزيلا.
عفوا.
هلا بناخذ يعني ملاحظات من المداخلين من المتحدثين ومن ثم بناخذ كمان جولة أخرى من الأسئلة.
شكله راح سأل السؤال وطلع. أنا بدي أحكي بس بقضية okay, I'll talk about the universities and their role. I'm not really sure about concerted effort in Palestinian universities to launch a program of reading Marx or rereading Marx or relaunching Marx. I'm not really sure about any course specifically taught anywhere in Palestine about this topic, but it's worth teaching in relation, obviously. I mean, who are we to say? He's a genius, a philosopher, a critic, an economist that has change the shape of world's history. So of course we need to engage him, but again, to engage him from the perspective of our experience. What can we bring to the table, to the Marxist discussion, from this specific particular content of the Palestinian experience? How do we go back and revisit his work in order to read him and extend his insights based on the work that we are doing? And there are obviously many debates that people have addressed over the years. We can learn from other contexts. I mean, in the Indian context, for example, Latin American context, how they read or continue to read Marx in new ways. How do we sort of develop that grounded theory from our own realities in order to deal with that, with his insights and philosophical work? But I'm not really sure about any university where this project has been really established. Yes, please.
But there is a reading group every week, I think, in the Sakakini Center. So there is a Marx study group. Maybe not on university level, but Marx is all about reading and studying and discussing together. And after all, Marx was a learner himself. So it's never the question, what can Marx bring to me or to my situation, but always how we appear in the perspective of Marx. So it's never Marx catering to a political situation as, let's call it more a positivist, empiricist, I would call it neoliberal academia tries to sell us theories that are hand-tailored, customized for our supposed situation, but rather how we get, let's say, displaced or mobilized or questioned through a text, which obviously does not directly speak to a situation. That I would always say with Marx. And there is a reading group, a study group every week. But I wanted to briefly to comment on the Coca-Cola question. Didn't you ask about Coca-Cola? Yeah, tamam, okay. What is the use of bringing a company to any country? I mean, very briefly, capitalism is not about use value. It's always about exchange value. And exchange value is the expression of an abstract social relation called value. And value as movement is the self-valorization of value as surplus value, which is called capital. This is the whole story. It's very simple, very boring, and no secret. The problem comes in when people try to make sense of it, when fantasizing about the use values that are produced as a byproduct of capitalism. Coca-Cola, it's okay. I mean, you can drink it. A lot of sugar, and you can work maybe more. So in terms of temporality of capital, it's good. You can work more. I didn't read the section on the struggle for the regular working day in Marx, when it's all about the perspective of capital wants to push beyond the 24-hour, 7, during the week, working condition of chronometric time, and to intensify the working hours in terms of value. There maybe Coca-Cola is not bad, but then other drinks maybe might be better. But I hope I understood your question correctly. There is no use in it, because capitalism is not about use. It has never been, and this is a fantasy. People, ideologues of all countries try to sell capitalism on the level of use. It is always about value and surplus value, which is the movement of capital, completely independent of what your individual or non-individual, intentional or non-intentional use value may be. Maybe you want to buy a product just to spit it into the toilet or throw it away, which is fine. This is maybe the use you have for it, as long as you pay for it. Yeah. So, but I'm not sure whether I really answered your question. So I'm not against Coca-Cola in specific, you know. I also sometimes drink it, but it's too much sugar.
To be honest, I can't answer your question. I think we should both get to the Sakakini Center and start reading Marx and discuss it. To be honest, again, it is now the first time I started to read Marx. I'm coming from the completely opposite corner. So I was trained also in rational choice. So, but I became critical all over the time. So between during 20 years reading, learning, yeah. But we need both to get to the Sakakini Center, start reading Marx, and then we might find an answer to your question. Oh, thank you. Now I will give it to my colleague. He surely knows an answer. Thank you.
يعني عندي يعني ملاحظة مرتبطة بالسؤال اللي تفضل فيه الطالب، بدءا من الأستاذ اللي تحدث عن أي جهود حول قراءة ماركس عربيا ومراكمة هذا الجهد. حقيقة ماركس لم يقدم، يعني كما نعرف، لم يقدم نصوصا مغلقة أو نصوصا عصية على التفسير. هو نفسه، يعني إذا تحرينا في أعماله، هو نفسه يستخدم إنجلترا في اقتصاده السياسي وفرنسا في تحليله للصراع الطبقي. يعني لن نجد ذلك الخلط بأنه يضرب سياق تاريخي في سياق تاريخي آخر. فعمليا قراءته العربية متأتية، لكن هل يتم يعني ممكن إنتاج ماركس عربيا، لكن هل هي في تراكم ما في تراكم؟ هذا اللي يعني ما عندي علم فيه. على الأقل يعني قبل فترة كان في هون في الجامعة شيء عن سمير أمين، ويعني هو يمكن خير من قرأ ماركس في سياق العالم الثالث بحدود معرفتي. يعني هلا نعود لسؤال الطالب اللي تحدث انه يعني ماركس يتحدث عن ان الحريه لن تبدا الا بعد انهاء العبوديه، ثم انتقل لمساله انه افتراض سلميه التغيير. يعني في النقطة الأولى بطبيعة الحال هو لا يجد حرية مفصولة عن فكرة المساواة والعدالة، وبالتالي أساس الحرية ومنبع الحرية هي مساواة الناس. قبل ذلك يصبح كل حديث عن الحرية محض تصور نظري، باعتبار أن الناس في هذه الحالة لن يكونوا متساوين في التعبير عن الحرية، والحرية دون التعبير عنها تصبح مجرد مفهوم ذهني. النقطة الثانية، أما افتراض يعني حد علمي وحد قراءتي، وخاصة أني يعني مقبل على مشروع يتعلق في العنف لدى ماركس، يعني حد علمي أنا لم ألتقط شيء يتعلق في سلمية التغيير. يعني الصمت أحيانا ممكن استنطاق صمت ماركس عن قضية ما وهي مفتوحة للتأويل. يعني في النهاية هو لا يقدم نصوصا مقدسة، يعني هو يقدم نصوص مفتوحة للتأويل. إذا كان صمته في بعض النقاط يعني استنتاج سلمية التغيير، أنا شخصيا عندي استنتاجات لا لعنفية التغيير. يعني هذا لاحقا ممكن أقدم أطروحة متماسكة إذا وصلتك الفكرة. شكرا.
شكرا جزيلا. هلا بناخذ يعني استراحه لغايه الساعه 12:15. رجاء البقاء معنا لانه المحاضره يعني النشاط قائم، وهناك محاضره مركزيه الساعه 12:15، يعني 12. لا قدمناها كونه في عنا في وقت، فبناخذ بريك نصف ساعة وتبدأ المحاضرة القادمة الدكتورة جودي دين، وهي أستاذة في ويليام سميث كوليدج، والمداخلة بعنوان ماركس والثورة اليوم. وشكرا للجميع.
And please note, it's 15 minutes earlier than on the program, because we're really good on time. Thanks to Allah's moderation, we're really on time. So we start 15 minutes earlier than you see in the program. 12:15.
Good afternoon, everyone. مرحبا للجميع. We're going to start our second session, our keynote address. I'm going to wait a couple of minutes. So have a seat, please.
Translators, if I speak too fast, will you wave? Okay.
Okay, so we'll start then our second session this morning. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this remarkable event, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Jody Dean. Jody is a well-known American political theorist and professor in the political science department at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in New York. She earned her PhD from Columbia University and taught at different universities, as well as she had various visiting research appointments in Vienna, Montreal, Wales, and others. She has given talks all over the world, from Turkey to Peru, from Croatia to Ecuador. Jody has made important contributions to contemporary political theory, media studies, and Marxist theory, and feminist studies. Her work on communicative capitalism in particular received a lot of attention for her critique of the ways in which the online merging of democracy and capitalism subverts the structures of democratic governance by valorizing emotional expression over logical discourse. She is the author of many books, including the following titles: Solidarity of Strangers, or Feminism After Identity Politics, Aliens in America, Conspiracy Cultures from Outer Space to Cyberspace, which is a book that I taught after my graduation, right away from Penn State. I got a position in Turkey, and I taught there in the American Studies department, and I was happy to find Jody's book, so I used it right away. She's also the author of Zizek's Politics, Democracy and Other Neoliberal Fantasies, The Communist Horizon, which I have a copy of, and I was honored today to have Jody's autograph on it. And most recently, Crowds and Party. Her book, Comrade, is coming out next year from Verso. So please help me welcome Jody Dean.
Thanks so much, Jamil, and I'm thrilled to be here, so thanks to the organizers and the people who brought me. When I think about Marx, I think about revolution, so that's what I'm going to talk about today, and I'll focus specifically on the Communist Manifesto. Now, it might seem strange to talk about revolution, particularly communist revolution. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1992. For some, this means that the time of revolution has passed. They claim that capitalism and democracy won, assuming that democracy must be capitalist, and that capitalism, even as imperialism, somehow can be democratic. For them, capitalism and democracy, blended together and practically the same, allegedly proved themselves to be better, more efficient. Communism doesn't work, we're told, handed the end of the USSR as evidence, as if history always and forever is the endless repetition of the same. Instead of revolution, we're now supposed to direct our energies toward incremental changes and overlook injustice. The defenders of the status quo insist that there is no need here and now for socialist, much less critical communists who everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things, end quote from the Communist Manifesto. Now, I don't believe it. The uprisings, demonstrations, and revolts of the first decades of the 21st century indicate that capitalist democracy claimed victory too soon. These days, the failure of the system into which capitalism and democracy have converged is clear. Dramatic increases in economic inequality have convinced millions of people across the globe of the inability of capitalism to meet basic needs for food, housing, health, clean water, and education. Capitalist states actively protect the very rich, promote militarism and racism, and rely on dispossession, extraction, surveillance, and enclosure. Planetary warming, mass extinctions, sea level rise, and desertification point to the capitalist system's threat to life on Earth. Corporations, financial institutions, and international organizations and agreements block people from political arenas that claim to be democratic, pushing those of us who want to be heard onto online networks and into the streets. 100 years since the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace, political movements across the globe are taking the perspective of revolution. A new generation is returning to communism. It's an idea whose time has come again. So I'm going to highlight 3 elements of the Communist Manifesto that I think continue to be important for us today. The struggle of the proletarianized, the party, and revolution. So I begin with the struggle of the proletarianized. The Communist Manifesto gives us a vision of society split into 2 hostile classes of exploiters and exploited, oppressors and oppressed. All of history is a history of the struggle between them. In capitalist society, the primary classes are the bourgeoisie and proletariat. Bourgeoisie designates the class with resources, the owners of capital and employers of labor. Proletarians are those whose survival depends on selling their labor power. Unlike peasants, they don't have their own land. Unlike small business owners, the petty bourgeoisie, they don't own their own businesses. Proletarians are forced to earn a wage. Now, some argue today that this depiction no longer applies, if it ever did. And they usually give us 2 kinds of reasons. The first reason for the irrelevance, they say, of this distinction between bourgeoisie and proletariat, the first reason they say is that classes today are highly differentiated. Not only is there a strong middle class, not really, but that's what they say. Not only is there a strong middle class, but there are multiple economically, socially, and culturally different forms of status that resist easy categorization. The second objection to Marx's continued relevance is that identities other than those of class are more politically salient, particularly identities associated with gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, religion, and ability. And Jamil earlier was complicating these notions that are behind this critique. But let me say something more about each one of these critiques. The claim regarding class differentiation misses its target. The Communist Manifesto does not treat bourgeoisie and proletariat as fixed classes. They are not demographic categories based on income. They are positions that reflect tendencies, a tendency toward capital concentration, and a tendency toward dependency and immiseration. As modern industry develops, parts of the middle class sink down into the proletariat. Quote, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers, and retired tradesmen generally, the handicraftsmen and peasants. The ruling class itself undergoes a process of dissolution. Capitalist crises the churn and decay of industries rising and falling, these threaten the existence of sectors of the bourgeoisie. So the manifesto does not deny the presence of differentiated classes. It points to processes that impact everyone, benefiting the very few and proletarianizing the many. The claim regarding the political relevance of identities other than class identities is more complex. It implies that communists assume that workers are all white men, thereby erasing histories and contributions of communists from all over the world, as if there had not been communist revolutions in Asia, as if communism were not important to third world anti-colonial liberation struggles, as if women were not communists. It ignores the way that some of the most visible fighters against racism have been communists and opponents of capitalism. In effect, the identitarian objection maps onto communist emphasis on proletarian revolution, a critique more applicable to a very narrow vision of trade unionism. Nevertheless, there is something to the claim for a decline in the relevance of class politics. It marks a real historical defeat, the erosion of working class political power, and the ongoing political mobilization of anti-communism. Defeated on the political plane, and the name of this defeat is neoliberalism, the left shifted to the social and cultural terrain. It fragmented into issues and identities. On some issues, and with respect to some identities, there have been political advances. But by turning away from international class struggle, the left lost the capacity to defend and advance the commitments to social welfare that had resulted from this struggle in the 20th century. Economic inequality increased, commitment to social provisioning, education, public housing, social services collapsed. By the second decade of the 21st century, the limits of identity as an operator for politics have become clear. Identity claims no longer map cleanly onto left politics. Conservative, imperialist, and capitalist positions justify themselves with recourse to identity, sometimes by emphasizing national, ethnic, and religious specificity, and sometimes by emphasizing sex, race, or sexuality. A symptom of the diminished political capacity of identity is the mutual policing of who can claim what identity and under what conditions. Like, what gives you the right or privilege to speak as a woman, as a person of color, as queer? Rather than identity functioning as the ground of a claim, its evocation is contested. Identities are sites of struggle. For example, in 2014 and 2015, riots in Ferguson and Baltimore pushed the fact of class struggle into mainstream discussions of race in the US. An African-American president had not produced material improvement in Black people's lives. As Kianga Yamada Taylor notes, after Obama came into office, Black median income fell by 10.9%. White income fell 3.6%. So class politics is back. The extreme inequality that communicative capitalism's complex networks generate and embed has made the struggle between oppressor and oppressed, proletariat and bourgeoisie, return to center stage. Now, this epic confrontation appears differently from how it did in the 19th and 20th century. The crowds and riots marking the first decades of the 21st century are the new face of global class struggle. Arab Spring, Occupy movement, Chilean student protests, Montreal fees protest, Brazilian transportation and FIFA protest, Gezi Park protest, European anti-austerity protest, Black Lives Matter, as well as multiple ongoing and intermittent strikes of teachers, communication workers, civil servants, and medical workers all over the world, are protests of the class of those proletarianized under communicative capitalism. So these are not merely the defensive struggles of a middle class facing cuts to social services, wage stagnation, unemployment, foreclosure, and indebtedness. They are fronts in class war under the conditions of global communicative capitalism, revolts of those whose communicative activities generate value that is expropriated from them. Class struggle under communicative capitalism, then, doesn't appear primarily as workplace struggles. The flexibilization and precaritization of work enabled by networked communication technology spreads communicative production throughout the social field. Struggles follow the workplace's own extension into every part of life via the expectation that workers are always reachable, always on. For contingent and mobile workers, phones are means of production. Any place is a workplace. Student, debt, housing, and education protests carry on the struggle of the proletarianized as they demand socialized rather than private solutions. Those struggles that do occur at workplaces increasingly involve communicative laborers, teachers, transport workers, and service sector workers. The changes in communication and subjectivity that accompany communicative capitalism pose real problems for the organization of the proletarianized. Inescapable demands on our attention enable images to circulate more easily than arguments, positions, and demands. We can process them faster. Intense attachments to individuality, to difference, to uniqueness, all of which are important in the struggle for jobs and opportunities, all of these hinder solidarity. But these challenges are not new. The Communist Manifesto itself notes how competition between the workers makes it hard for them to unite and organize. Marx does not simply link communism to the identity of the working class. He links it to working class movement. In the 19th century, worker uprisings were pushing forward, coming together, breaking out, and disrupting capital processes of value extraction. This active movement incites Marx to see in proletarian struggle more than demands for shorter working days, more than demands for safer working conditions and higher wages. He sees the political process of the subject of communism, and the same applies today. The movement of the proletarianized all over the world is away from and against the capitalist system that fragments and exploits us, pitting us one against another for the benefit of the 1%. It is toward that emancipatory egalitarianism that goes under the name communism. Second point, the party. Perhaps the most crucial insight of the Communist Manifesto is that class struggle is political struggle. Economic power expresses itself as political power, the power of a ruling class to make laws for its own benefit. Marx and Engels write, the executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie, end quote. So even as the Communist Manifesto presents an internationalist vision of a world under capitalism, a world characterized by colonialism, dependency, resource exploitation, and uneven concentrations of wealth, It argues for the conquest of political power by the proletariat, a struggle that occurs at the level of the nation state. To win on this front, the proletariat has to organize itself as a party and acquire political supremacy. Another way to understand this point is to recognize that the abolition of capitalism does not come about by economic destruction alone. The normal operation of the capitalist system is characterized by crises, by epidemics of overproduction. In the words of the manifesto, quote, society suddenly finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Industry and commerce seemed to be destroyed, end quote. The bourgeoisie has created a mode of production and circulation that generates crises, engenders widespread immiseration, and calls into being the very force that will bring it down. Proletariat names capitalism's self-creation of what destroys it. The proletariat is a collective subject, a force no longer dispersed in individual and local acts of smashing, sabotage, and disruption, but concentrated through its struggles against the bourgeoisie. So Marx sees more than the power of the bourgeoisie and the misery of the proletariat. He recognizes as well the weakness of the bourgeoisie and the strength of the proletariat. Capitalist society produces those who will overthrow it, the class of proletarians, and it aids in their development. So the manifesto describes how modern industry brings previously separate and isolated workers together. Improved means of communication enable workers in different industries and localities to connect with and learn from each other. As workers start to organize themselves into a class and consequently into a political party, they are able to exploit divisions among the bourgeoisie and secure legislative victories. The manifesto gives examples of the laws that are passed to limit the length of the working day. These victories further strengthen the working class, expanding their sense of themselves as a class. Now, contemporary capitalism has refined its capacity for wealth destruction. Over $34 trillion of market value was lost in the financial crisis of 2008. In the course of the recession that followed, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. The top 1% captured 121% of the income gains made between 2009 and 2011. Not only was the 1% better able to weather the crisis than the rest of us, but it was also able to increase its share. It's not just economic destruction that's at stake in the abolition of capitalism. It's bringing to an end the capitalist cycle of creative destruction. We could say we've got to have the destruction of destruction, and this political destruction is brought to an end by the proletariat. It's not the task of the working class to organize as workers, because they're already organized as workers in the factory, which enables them to become conscious of their material conditions and the need to combine into unions. The abolition of capitalism depends on the organization of the proletariat politically, as a party, as a political association capable of cutting across workplace, sector, region, and nation. The working class as a class is implicated in the success or stability of capitalism. Capitalism configures the working class's struggles with the bourgeoisie. In contrast, the party takes as its horizon capitalism's supersession in communism. For Marx, the party is necessary because class struggle is not simply economic struggle, it's political struggle. The third part, revolution. I think we should consider the manifesto of the Communist Party as a guide for us. Its anchoring of political change in a global and historical understanding of economic production and circulation, its focus on the antagonism between proletariat and bourgeoisie at the basis of the capitalist mode of production, and its emphasis on political struggle make this nearly 200-year-old text more relevant today than it ever has been. The manifesto offers a vision of an economy out of control, a class of owners concentrating wealth in its own hands, and an ever-increasing, ever-immiserated class of wage laborers. At the same time, it locates power, possibility, and right in the hands of the oppressed. The oppressed are not simply exploited, de-skilled, and precarious. They stand up and fight back. A militant proletariat whose movement is the movement of the majority for the majority. A revolutionary class whose emancipation is the emancipation of all of society. The strength of the proletariat comes from its economic position in production and its historical role as the agent of communism. The strength of the manifesto stems from the way it links these two together to make the goal of the workers' movement a radically changed society. Now, Marx doesn't say that the workers told him this. He doesn't present evidence from existing socialists who are advocating much more than bourgeois revolution. Rather, he presents communist revolution as what the ruling class fears. The manifesto of the Communist Party begins and ends by describing communism as a threat. The famous opening, "A specter is haunting Europe," the specter of communism. And then the saucy close, "Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution." The ruling class is not as strong as they want us to think. They're afraid of us, the workers, the many, the oppressed. A ruling class that relies on force, on walls and police and incarceration, that relies on all this for security, is fundamentally and existentially insecure. The power of the idea of communism derives from the effect it has on the proletariat's class enemies, an effect that precedes the existence of the proletariat organized as a party of communists. Marx seizes that fear. He doesn't say, "Oh, let's not call ourselves communists because that's too controversial." He doubles down, championing the term and declaring the need for the forcible overthrow of all existing conditions. This boldness is yet another reason the manifesto is an indispensable guide for us today. Today, the ruling class's fear of communism appears in sometimes surprising places. For example, Barack Obama gave a speech where he positioned fascist, communist, jihadists, and homegrown demagogues as threats to American values. Communist, nearly 30 years after the defeat of the Soviet Union and capitalist democracy's declaration of victory, are as dangerous as terrorists. Now, why did Obama feel the need to call communists such a threat? Because communist, as Marx well knew, is the name that we have for a society without exploitation, a society where people collectively determine how to produce for their common needs, as well as the name for someone who fights to realize such a society. At a time of ever-increasing economic inequality and state violence, as well as of rising popular militancy and increased support for socialism, Obama was trying to exorcise a specter that continues to haunt the ruling class. But this continued haunting is our signal to champion the name communist again. In fact, anti-communism is on the increase. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orban in Hungary, the Law and Justice Party in Poland, the Alliance for Deutschland in Germany, Modi in India, all of these campaign as anti-communists. Across the globe, the movements of the proletarianized keep the perspective of revolution alive. People are rioting, demonstrating, and organizing against capitalist dispossession of their labor, lives, and futures. Because capitalism's system of dispossession operates through the wage, debt, privatization, enclosure, theft, colonization, financialization, and racialized state violence, the movements of the proletarianized mobilize a broad international array of people and concerns. Describing the unfitness of the bourgeoisie to be the ruling class, Marx emphasizes the sinking conditions of the working class. The producer can no longer produce but must be fed. In the words of the manifesto, society can no longer live under this bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society. The incompatibility of capitalism with society is most undeniable when we look at anthropogenic climate change. What the manifesto calls modern industry has set off atmospheric warming that's leading to temperatures not seen on the planet for millions of years. There are multiple effects: melting glaciers, thawing permafrost, sea level rise, desertification. The repercussions for human society include the loss of hundreds of thousands of miles of coastline, the submersion of coastal cities and communities, the loss of arable and pasturable land, the loss of fresh water, the loss of ways of life, increasing numbers of refugees, increasing conflict and resource wars. But global capital has proven unfit for addressing climate change. Investment in extractive industries and fossil fuels continue. Coal mining, oil drilling, and fracking continue. Large-scale commodity production and shipping continue. That one city, state, or country might bring carbon emissions under control is irrelevant from the standpoint of overall warming. It could just as easily ship its carbon-emitting industries elsewhere. Climate change forces us to acknowledge that not all communities, economies, and ways of life are compatible. A capitalist economy premised on production for the sake of private capital accumulation stands in fundamental conflict with the planning and transformation necessary for dismantling the industries and practices that contribute to planetary warming. Forcing that change is the political challenge of our time, which is why a popular slogan is system change, not climate change. Now, you know, some read Marx as advocating a productivism where the point of proletarian revolution is eliminating the fetters on production caused by bourgeois relations of production. And the manifesto points in this direction when it says that the proletariat will use its political supremacy to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. But a better reading of Marx recognizes that while continued industrial development may have made sense in the 19th century, the meaning of industrial development has changed. In the 21st century, we must face the global fact of uneven development and the impact of this unevenness on production, trade, modes of life, and capacity to adapt to and mitigate the effects of a changing climate. The relations of production and circulation in imperialist society are fetters. They prevent the development of modes of production and circulation liberated from fossil fuels. They foreclose large-scale planning. The contemporary capitalist economy privileges expensive and fanciful high-tech solutions that let the very rich continue to increase their wealth while the rest are relegated to sacrifice zones. Today, the movement of the proletarianized is the movement of all whom capitalism deprives of a future, all whose work and lives are expropriated from them by a 1% that presumes that the rest of us are either for them or non-existent. Those proletarianized by climate change are thus those whose land is becoming uninhabitable and whose lives are becoming unlivable. All over the world, on Pacific islands that will soon be submerged, in African and Middle Eastern countries scorched by rising temperatures, in territories inhabited by native, indigenous, and First Nation people witnessing the unfolding calamity of species loss, and in global cities where millions encounter undrinkable water and unbreathable air, the proletarianized appear with new faces, new demands, and new certainty that the only way forward is together, collectively. The struggle around climate change is the struggle for communism. To conclude, the Communist Manifesto continues to be a guide for us, practically, because the interests of the capitalist class remain opposed to those of the rest of us, the proletarianized. Society is fundamentally divided. They are our enemy. Their flourishing depends on our misery. The only way this will change in a way that will benefit us all is if we force it. The fact of the fundamental division between the capitalist class and the rest of us makes revolutionary force necessary, and it makes it right. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jody, for this insightful and timely intervention on the relevance of Marxist thought and in general and the Communist Manifesto in particular to our global conditions and what might be called the global apartheid regime now that has polarized wealth around the world. Let's take a few questions and comments if you have to Jody, and please just make sure your questions and comments are short and precise. You have the translation. Okay, تفضل. Introduce yourself, please. And
thank you so much. My name is Nasser Al-Qadi. My question is, I want to bring up a case, and I need you to explain to me. I have been learning about Marx and its interpretations since I was hosted by a German professor, a German professor 2 years ago. He has done intensively in this field. My question is, I might be misinterpreting the status quo. During your explanations, you are trying to show the negative image of capitalism. Okay, it's fine. But we need successful paradigms on the ground. We are trying to look at China, for instance, as a successful paradigm. But the case that I want to bring up here, Venezuela. Venezuela has been a deteriorated country, has never been stable, has never been successful. If we look at their discourses, their rulers have been calling for Simon Bolivar's values, but on the ground, the country has never been stable, has never been democratic. What's your interpretation to this case? Thank you.
can we take some more questions and then Jody will تفضل عيسى. And then
Okay.
English تفضل.
Okay, I want to ask about the party actually.
Where's the question?
Yeah. I want to ask about the party. It has been always talking about the working class as part of the party. Yani, especially in the left parties, it was always like we have working class as part of the party, but never as the major part of that party, as the decision making in that party. And always it has been like the I mean, we are not committed to that. So I was searching for a sort of alternative for form of a party that still continue to be following the Marx and the Marxist approach in general. And so if there is some alternative, and I was wondering if the unions, if we get it out of the economic demanding text only or context only, can we politicize these unions into a new form of political party that can actually follow the Marxist approach in a way, or is there has been there like a debate about that issue or not? Thank you.
Thank you. Question here in the back.
Yeah, thank you. So I asked this question from a position of agreement with everything you say, but I just wanted to highlight a certain gap between theory and practice that has always troubled me, which is, of course, one of the genius of Marx is the universality of the proletariat, that it's a generic category beyond the limitations of the body. Like, we can be born anywhere in any kind of situation, and the proletariat is something that's universal. It's universally true as an analytic category. But in practice, of course, the proletariat organizes itself through identitarian means. In the US, it's race. Here we have taifia, sectarianism, and so forth. It's different everywhere, but the supposedly universal generic category is, in practice, not so universal. And just as one example, I mean, what's happening in France, which is a potentially revolutionary moment, but the banlieues have been very quiet. So we see a bifurcation of the proletariat by identitarian means. And it's really the white proletariat that's revolting. So I just wanted to highlight this gap between theory and practice of the proletariat.
Okay, thank you. Can we have a question here for Dr. Lina?
Thank you very much for the talk. I think my question is a little bit connected to the former one. I think I'm wondering, because I'm really sympathetic with the way that you're trying to like unify certain or different struggles under this idea of proletarianization, like all over the world. But I'm wondering in how far certain feminist critiques of Marx, like for example the one of Silvia Federici and like the topic of reproductive labor, which is like a systematic critique of like the capital and not so much of like the idea of the Communist Manifesto, in how far they can still be part of this unification process or where they take place, because I don't think that these issues are indifferent towards the way that struggles are organized or the way that we like claim a certain like unity of proletarian struggles, but there are like different issues to be addressed, and it matters in which proportions they are part of these struggles.
Thank you. Can you pass it here?
Okay, I have like just 2 points. The first one is that I think that in the Third World, in the Arab world, specifically in Palestine, Marxism had been connected to revolution. And I think like there's lots of literature about how Marxism had traveled to the Arab countries and how it was incarnated as a form for struggle. And Robert Young's book about how it translated. But my main question or comment here is how like the colonialism and liberalism or capitalism are connected. And specifically in Palestine, like the whole, after the Oslo Agreement, the rupture with the Palestinian revolutionary history, the main mean or tool of pacifying Palestinians and their anti-colonial struggle was through spreading more, first the capitalist mode of production, but then the more liberal attachments, sensibilities, and of course individualistic modes of being, and that was like the main tool of combating Palestinians' revolutionary sensitivities, practices, and attachments. So this connection, I think, in the context of the Arab world, in Palestine, there is a very deep connection between capitalist mode of production, liberal sensibilities and attachments, and colonialism, and in Palestine, the form of settler colonialism. My last comment is also how this process had also changed the Palestinian women's movement and feminist movement. And now, of course, with the NGOization of the whole feminist work, had also, through funding and had also changed the whole agenda of the Palestinian women's movement from a more material feminism to a more liberal forms of feminism. So that's
let's just a second. Second round. Let's let Jody answer some of these questions. There's really many things to unpack here. So Jody, good luck.
On the successful on-the-ground paradigms, right? That's always going to be a hard question but it should be a hard question for any political project, because it would be very strange if some sort of liberal Democrat sitting here and we should say, well, do you have any models for a successful liberal democracy, one that has not forwarded slavery and imperialism and had the largest system of mass incarceration in history, right? There's no, anytime you try with this, where's your real example? You get all sorts of challenging problems, because real life always has challenging problems. So I don't think that Venezuela, I mean, I'm not going to say that it's a perfect place, particularly because of the horrific work of the United States throughout South and Central America, throughout Latin America, all during the 70s. The United States makes things very, very difficult there. And I don't think it would be fair to deny the support that Chavez had much of the time. So I think we should make sure we keep that into any discussion of Venezuela. Also, we should, positive things we can say about Cuba, particularly with respect to education and medical care. So those are, I'll stop on the empirical examples there. On the questions of the party, the interesting thing, right, as we know, is that even Lenin's party changed shape over time, right? Sometimes it operated underground, sometimes it was official, sometimes he shrunk it, sometimes he grew it, sometimes he disagreed with it and threatened to quit, right? He would have open arguments with people in it. So parties also, we can think about it in a very abstract way as a political form for fighting for political power. And then we can recognize Black Panthers in the United States thought of themselves as a political party, even though they didn't run people for office, but they worked as a party because their goals were political, and they weren't just doing, say, community organizing for the sake of something like charity. They were doing community organizing for the sake of building political power. With respect to the challenges around working class parties, and you're right, there are real challenges. I want to use a very tiny example from a magazine called The Party Organizer, which was published in the 1930s in the United States. Their Communist Party at that point was barely 10 years old. And so they had this manual for party leaders in low-level branches in the US Communist Party. And it was trying to tell them how to build a party. And they were saying things like, make sure to greet people when they come to the meeting. And they would say, make sure your meeting is never more than 2 hours long. Then the next issue, meetings should not be more than 3 hours long. The next issue, 4-hour meetings have to stop, right? So people didn't know how to organize. And one of the things that they said is, don't talk to workers using Marxist-Leninist jargon, because they will think that you're only the party, but you're still a worker too. And so here the opposition between worker and party wasn't it wasn't you are in the a worker, you're not a worker. It was what was your mode of relating, and what was your mode of expression. So at least for these organizers, as they thought about themselves in the party, they actually didn't feel themselves workers anymore. And in some ways that's liberating, but in other ways that was alienating. So for me, that becomes helpful in thinking about some of these challenges as understanding how are better models for working class parties. On unions, I mean, it's very hard for me to imagine unions as parties. I mean, I think we have different words for them because unions are work for economic benefits and parties work for political power. On the identitarian gaps, so again, I want to use an example from the Communist Party of the United States from the 1930s, because the Communist Party in the US was the first interracial organization to really work to fight for integrated unions and an integrated party and against lynch law, white supremacy, and Jim Crow in the South. They worked very, very hard. They even made it a matter of people's personal lives and said, at your dances. The first person purged from the Communist Party in the United States was purged because he acted in a racist way to some black guys coming into a social event. So there have been huge efforts to, at least in the CP, particularly in the 1930s, things got worse under the 40s. They changed a little bit, go up and down. But this gap was not as strong as you are saying. I think that that gap is one story that's crucially important, but we should not proceed as if that's the only story, because then we miss real histories. I guess, I don't think of Federici as critical of Marx as she sees herself as being. What I think is crucial is the introduction of social reproduction to the argument. And I think another way that I could have described and probably should some of these struggles is also as part of as responses to social reproduction crises, because those also let us get at the failure of capitalism, but they do better work, as you rightly point out, in drawing out the nature of those crises. I would say that for the proletarianized, the social reproduction crises are felt like super strongly. So, but I think that your intervention there is crucial. The point on how capitalism and liberalism as colonialism have impacted Palestine, that's crucially interesting. It makes the story so strong, and also in a way that I didn't know until your comment, it lets us see internationally the collapse of the left and the de-radicalization as part of this global capitalist offensive, rather than all these being unique places. That this happened everywhere. So thank you for that. That's helpful for me.
Let's take some more comments. We have a young man there and here.
Okay. I got like 3 connected questions. Like the first one says like about capitalism and the proletariat. They are like, how can I explain it? Maybe many of us got the same opinion of it, but they are the two faces for the same coin, because proletariat or capitalism, they can't go without each other. Like if you got money, but you don't have worker, you can't do anything. And the opposite side also, if you got workers, without money, you can't do nothing. So it's ended. Like both of them need each other, and like it's like this, like they are the two faces of the same coin. Is that true, or it's I just would like to see your opinion. And also the second one, actually, like the new foundations, the new establishments, which funded from the US or the countries from Europe, which give people here a chance to do something. Like when you take a loan from some foundation and you make like your own project, and just you make this project to bring you money, and after that when you started you got a wrong plan for your project, and you can't pay back those money, and when you don't pay you go to jail. And it's happening here in West Bank, especially in West Bank. It's wisely happening for many of the people, especially for the employees. Like my third question also says, like, does the employees of the 21st century, they are like the new slavers? They are like the new slaves? Is it a new way of slavery? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for your brilliant lecture. I really enjoyed it a lot, and I'm completely with you as regards the key arguments Marx made about class, the division in classes. It's now more relevant than ever. I only want to make one suggestion. We may add to this list you have mentioned of all the global challenges and problems like environmental pollution and so on. We might add another thing where our capitalist class or industries, large industries, keep their hands off and do not anything against it, but only to severe it again. This is the new suggestion, the new proposal by the World Bank to switch from the Bismarckian social protection system to pure cash transfers. In my eyes,
universal basic income?
Yeah, universal basic income. We may discuss this if this is not also the next way how to relinquish large industries from taking care, from another task, from one of the final tasks they had to support their workers. And the best is how they, the reasons they give for such a step. Because it would not have worked, Bismarckian social systems would not have worked because of the large informality of markets and the technological changes taking place as regards the nature of work. But why don't we do something against the informality of markets? So this is what I'm made to say. Thank you.
شكرا للعمل الجميل والمثمر اللي قدمتيه. عندي ليس سؤال لكنه ملاحظة. لا يتم عادة الاهتمام بمسألة الجريمة المنظمة وسيطرتها على السوق المالي لأنهم يخجلون بها الرأسماليين أو البرجوازيين، مع أنها هي ثاني أكبر قطاع إنتاجي في العالم هي الجريمة. المسألة الأخرى، جزء من البرجوازيين يتحدثون، على سبيل المثال جورج سوروس يقول أن البرجوازية فقدت قيمتها الأخلاقية، لم تعد برجوازية منتجة، أصبحت برجوازية افتراضية تملك المال على الحاسوب فقط، ومجموع أرباحها أصبح يكون غير ضروري لحياة البشر. على سبيل المثال هو نفسه أحد المتاجرين فيها يقول: ما هو المبرر الأخلاقي ليربح جورج سوروس 1.8 مليار دولار في يوم واحد وتنهار دولتين في آسيا؟ لم يعد الرأسمال أيضا منتج، أصبح رأسمال طفيلي بالكامل أو مالي بالكامل. المسألة الأخرى الديون، ذكرتيها كنقطة، أعتقد هي نقطة أساسية جدا. هي بمعنى البرجوازية الآن تحمل البشرية مبالغ مالية غير موجودة في العالم في الواقع، تحملني الأجيال القادمة. يعني بمعنى نحن مدينين للمؤسسات المالية كل فرد، وأيضا أحفادنا سيكونوا مدينين بعد أن يولدوا. فهي مسألة جدا مهمة في العلاقات الدولية، مسألة الديون، ومرة طرحت من قبل كوبا الامتناع عن دفع الديون، وكانت نقطة ثانية. الشيء الآخر هو استمرار العبودية في وقتنا الحالي في 21. هنالك الآن مسألة الفير تريد، هذه الاستهلاك لمواد لا تدخل فيها العبودية. أكبر دليل عليها الشوكولا مثلا. في هنالك كثير من المؤسسات في العالم تشترط شراء الشوكولا أن تكون مدموغة بفير تريد، بمعنى هذه الشوكولا تنتج بدون عبودية. لا زال للآن هنالك مزارع للكاكاو تستخدم العبودية، بمعنى البروليتاريا في العالم ليست موحدة الملامح. هنالك عبودية في مكان، وهنالك ظلم في مكان، وهنالك بروليتاريا إذا شئت أن نسميها أرستقراطية.
So if I've understood the questions correctly, so I would say capitalism depends on a proletariat and producing and proletarianizing an ever greater proletariat. It depends on that. I would, after capitalism, we don't know for sure, right? Under some utopian-ish ideals, the proletariat would dissolve itself because everything would be owned by everyone, and there would need to be a proletariat. On the other hand, that transition seems like it's going to take for a while, so that you would have a proletariat under socialism. That's sort of kind of a tricky thing, right? That's that concept. Whether or not it's still correct to call that class a proletariat, it's not clear to me. I'm not sure what I would lose or gain, or what one loses or gain. But it is clear that capitalism cannot do without the proletarianized. On these discussions of debt, I think it's interesting to connect the widespread use of debt by finance capital with a term that the sociologist Saskia Sassen has been offering, extractivism. So she thinks of extraction and extractivism not only in terms of fossil fuels, but as the kinds of forms of extraction of wealth from people that they've already earned through exploited labor. And so debt would be a financial instrument of extraction. And I find that fairly useful. On slaves and slavery, that one's a little hard for me to answer, coming from as an American, whose country was based on a couple of centuries on chattel slavery. And so it's not, I worry a little bit about blurring the terms. Do we need a new form of oppressed labor that is not the allegedly free worker selling his or her labor power, and not the chattel slave? Or is it useful to call it slavery? There's a really interesting book by the Chinese scholar Jack Cho called Goodbye, I Slave. And Jack makes the connections between the workers in the Foxconn factories and American chattel slavery. And he shows the way that the designs of the dormitories for the workers and their sleeping arrangements look very much like the designs on the ships from the Middle Passage. He talks about the way that the suicides of the workers are very much like the suicides of the people from jumping off the ships to avoid being sold into slavery when they arrived in the Americas. So for Jack Cho, this connection that you're making is very powerful and very real and important, and he wants to take the hard line and say, yes, this is contemporary slavery, and we are politically and ethically wrong if we refuse to call it that. I think it's good in a general sense that capitalism is losing the myth that it had an ethical ground. I think that's useful. I think that means that the fact that it's actually never been legitimate can be clear and open. I think our political challenge is what comes afterwards. I mean, it seems to me that in too many of our societies, the system goes on without legitimacy, right? Everybody knows full well that it's not legitimate and that it's not working, and yet it persists. So we are in a situation of post-legitimacy or post-legitimation, and without an organized push, we will keep going in this direction of capitalist authoritarianism.
Anybody else? Raise your hand so we can get to you.
Hi. Maybe it's working. Okay. Recently, I want to look at to ask you, about the Palestinian situation. Recently, there has been demonstrations against, or a big discussion about social security. That's been a law that has been suggested by the government, and it's been noticed that the demonstrations against it by the workers are demonstrations that are pushed by the owners, the capitalists, the bourgeoisie, the owners of the companies and the owners of the factories, in a way to put pressure on the government not to allow such a law. Here I want to, to think with you, think with everyone maybe, about, again, this relation between the worker and between the proletariat, the contemporary proletariat, and its relation to its employers and the capitalist system that they work in. This idea that as long as you are being paid, you are free. And this, this subversion of the notion of slavery. We cannot again keep on looking at slavery as something, unpaid labor. Labor can be paid and yet still be kind of slavery, like in China and Foxconn factories, no, for example.
Foxconn?
Yes, but also here, I mean, we cannot still. It's obvious in a situation like in Palestine right now that the proletariat or the working class is totally controlled by and pushed and directed by the owners of the factories. So how do we think through that? How can we think that there is a way to revolutionize a class that's in a way controlled by and moved in a way they are going to demonstrate for their rights. There's this kind of fiction there. They are out there to demand the cancellation of social security because it's read as if it's against them, but not fighting for a better one. It's now fighting against its existence. So in a way,
okay, thank you. Yes, question there. In the back. Raise your hand, please. Let us see you.
Hi, thank you very much for the interesting talk. Actually, my question is a bit related to the previous one. You mentioned Gezi Park protests, and I was a protester myself there. And I saw it with my own eyes. I mean, all the people who are getting unified, and it doesn't base on religion or ethnicity and everything. But my point is that I want to talk about the people who stayed home during the protests. And I think there's a very thin line between populism and trying to read Marx and put it in our daily lives. Because when we look at how populism rose in Turkey, like how Erdogan consolidated his powers, it's also related to proletariat in Turkey, because these people were poor and they were victimized, and they saw him as a hero and as a liberator, if you will. And this applies to many countries in the world. Like, this is basically the nature of populism. So when I'm thinking about this revolution, like idea of revolution, and being inclusive with all the classes and the oppressed, but at the same time we have the oppressed actually unconsciously serving the hegemon when they're trying to voice themselves. So what is your take on this? I really wonder. Thank you very much.
So
okay, we got the point. Thanks.
the example of that, like the global, they want to be more global, more worldwide, so they get connected for the whole world.
Thanks. So I'm sorry I neglected the UBI question earlier, which I think connects with some of these other ones. So, weirdly, to my mind, in the U.S., universal basic income is being, and in the U.K., is being championed as a left-wing position. And people are saying that this is a great and good thing, and it's really being considered one of the good ideas on the left, and only a few people who are sort of criticized as old school social democrats are saying, wait a minute, but what about social welfare provisions? And people like poo-poo them like that's not a new idea. And so under ideas of kinds of newness and new ideas of Silicon Valley loves it, we're getting this kind of push. I hadn't known about the World Bank part about it. I mean, I think this is just completely crazy and wrong and deathly. And I think it's would be the case anywhere and everywhere that we should be against UBI. So, how do you do that? The answer is not sexy. It's organizing, right? The answer is always organizing, right? And I mean, and I wish it was some sort of great thing. But even if there was, like, here's the one slogan that would convince everyone, you still have to get it out there in a situation where everybody has a million more interesting things on their phone at that exact moment. And so one of the problems is the challenge of organizing and pushing the position. And so I think that is the challenge with working class whose ideas seem to be those or reflect those of owners of capital, right? This is what hegemony looks like. This is what ideology looks like. This is why the weakness of the left has long-term effects. And those effects are they hinder us, but the only way around them is not to think that there's going to be some sort of magic bullet. In the 90s, the magic bullet for everything was a blog or a website, right? Oh, will there be a technological fix? And still among some Europeans, it's like, oh, if we only have an online party where we just do our preferences, that will solve all the problems of party organization, and the people in the party won't be awful. Well, that's also not true, right? You have to work together, and you have to change the consciousness and change the practice, and change how people are thinking. Okay, I can't hear the translator. Let's see, was there anything else on that? The people who stay home, the people are gonna stay home. I mean, some people have real reasons for staying home, right? They have to care for other people. And that's why these crises of social reproduction are important to keep in mind and keep at the forefront. But it's also the case that a successful revolution usually only requires about 20% of the population, right? It's always going to be the case that people stay home, but you want the committed, active people changing the world.
We're done. Any more questions? I don't think so, right? So anyway, please, let's give another round of applause for Jody. Thank you so much for coming to BZU and Palestine, and thank you all for attending. Have a great day. We meet again at 6 o'clock at the Sakakini Center.
Yes, you did a great job. Thank you very much.
Becoming an expert in